What's going on, guys? This is Mark with Flex Marks the Spot. Today I have a video that's been a long time in the making. Today we're going to be comparing the 6 most popular multi-grip cambered bars. So up top we have the Bells of Steel Arch Nemesis. Next we have the Kabuki Strength Cadillac Bar. Then the Rogue Fitness MG4CN. Then the Rep Fitness Cambered Swiss Bar. Then the EliteFTS American Cambered Grip Bar. And lastly, the Titan Fitness Multi-Grip Cambered Bar. So all 6 of these bars, they're not all kind of direct competitors. And over the course of the past couple years, which is, when I got my first one of these, I found that they're not all created equally. Obviously, there's different build quality, different price points and things like that, the obvious. But then there's also very, very different training stimuluses between these bars. So with that, we're going to be breaking these bars into 3 different categories and looking at each bar within the category and comparing those head to head. And within those 3 categories, I'll give you kind of like the pros and cons that I found between them. Then at the end, I'll just give you my overall thoughts as to how I would rank these bars if I had to, rank them 1 through 6. With that, the 3 categories are going to be the arc pendulum bars, as I call them. So these ones have an arc and they have a pendulum effect. So that's going to be Bells of Steel, Kabuki, and Rogue. Next, we have the Seesaw bars, which are going to be the Titan Fitness and the EliteFTS. And then last, we have the Seesaw Pendulum Bar, which is the Rep Fitness, which is the only one in that category. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first category of bar we're going to look at here are the arc pendulum bars. So like the name suggests, these bars all have an arc design, and then they also have a pendulum effect. So these are the Rogue Fitness MG4CN, the Kabuki Kadillac Bar, and the Bells of Steel Arch Nemesis. So these bars, they achieve the pendulum effect by moving the center of rotation above the center of mass, which is going to be your center of rotation is your handles, and your center of mass is going to be your sleeves. So with all 3 of these bars, your handles are going to be above your sleeves. So with typical multi-grip bars, specifically, non-cambered ones, and then even, some of these other ones, you have kind of like a seesaw effect or a teeter-totter where the bar always wants to tip one way or the other. It never really finds a true center. I mean, you can center it, but you start adding other factors like mass and acceleration. The mass is going to be the weights you add on either side, and then acceleration is going to be your pressing, and you're never going to press, perfectly straight, because when you bench press, you're supposed to kind of be going at an angle anyway. So what that's going to do is add even more instability, and what you're going to be doing is absorbing that extra force and strain down in your wrists and your forearms. It might not be a big deal if you don't have any issues like with those areas, but you're adding that in as a limiting factor. So when you have the pendulum effect bars, or the pendulum effect bars, specifically the arc ones, what you have is you have this pendulum effect, which has your center of rotation above your center of mass, and the weight, which is your center of mass, is always going to want to come back to center, because gravity is always going to want to bring it back down to the lowest point. So you get that same effect here with the bar. So you're pressing and you notice the bars kind of, rotate a little bit. Specifically the Rogue one, what's going on there is that's gravity stabilizing the bar, and the bar is also, taking that extra force. So it's not passing that on down to you, similar to the non pendulum bars like I showed you, where you have to absorb that force to kind of keep it straight. So with these bars, you eliminate pretty much everything downstream as a limiting factor when you're pressing. So that's the biggest benefit of these bars. Specifically, the Rogue one, when you add rotating sleeves, you multiply that effect even more. So this is the one that people say is the most unstable, but I think it's the most balanced for that reason. So the way I like to demonstrate it is I have this kettlebell and this forearm trainer, which this rotating portion here acts as the rotating sleeves. But you see both, they have that pendulum effect with the center of mass below the center of rotation up top. So when you kind of rotate it out, you notice that the kettlebell, you get a little bit of strain, down on your wrist and your arm. You absorb a little bit of it, not as much as you would, with a non-pendulum bar, but like you get the forearm trainer. You notice that all of the force is being absorbed by the rotating sleeves and the pendulum effect. So this bar is actually the most balanced of the bunch. So that pendulum effect is definitely a benefit when you're doing any sort of pressing movements and you want to eliminate all other limiting factors other than your sheer pressing power. What that pendulum effect also does is it has gravity working against you when you move your center of rotation on the same plane as the center of mass. So for example, we bring back the kettlebell, you have your center of rotation, your center of mass. Like imagine, I'm sure you can imagine what this feels like. You have more of that strain in this area because gravity just wants to pull the weight back down to the true center. So when you do this, when you do any sort of curls, extensions with these bars, you're gonna have gravity fighting against you, which in turn adds them as limiting factors. So that's not a problem if you're trying to work your forearms and do curls with these bars, but you're not going to be targeting your bicep as you would with like a straight bar or dumbbells or any of the other bars that have the center of gravity and center of mass and center of rotation on the same plane.
Although these bars function very similarly because of the arc design, that's about where the design similarities end. The bar that differs the most from the pack is the Bells of Steel Arch Nemesis bar, and that's because it's about 20 pounds lighter than the next closest bar in this category. Despite being about 20 pounds lighter than the next closest competitor, the Arch Nemesis is pretty similar in size to the heavier counterparts, which can make it a bit awkward to handle and feel a little unbalanced despite the pendulum design. The Arch Nemesis was the first specialty bar that I owned, and I picked it up when it first launched in 2020. I initially wanted a Cadillac bar, but I could not justify the price, so I figured the Arch Nemesis would be a good compromise and a budget option. Even though I didn't have anything to compare it to at the time, I was immediately unimpressed with this bar. Because of how cheaply made it was, it just never felt good to use, and I never really looked forward to using it, and it's kind of the reason I started looking to upgrade shortly afterwards and eventually led to this video after picking up a bunch of bars over the next couple years. Admittedly, one thing that might be clouding my opinion of this bar to make me judge it so harshly is the fact that I was one of the original purchasers of this bar, and in the very first batch of version 1, these ones did not have knurling. Batch 2 of version 1 did have knurling, and all of them going forward did, so that's kind of one thing that left a bad taste in my mouth. Especially considering that when I reached out to customer service to see if they could throw me a bone, they pretty much told me to pound sand, which was very annoying considering I bought the launch version of this bar and a couple months after launch they updated it, so. Since then, I've used a version with knurling, and I can say that it is pretty much non-existent, so I wasn't really missing out. Maybe that was just the entitlement as a consumer that I was feeling at the time, but with that, I wouldn't really count the knurling here as a positive, versus some of the other bars on the list. Looking at the specs side by side, you can see that they drew heavy inspiration from the Cadillac bar, and it really looks like they just pretty much tried to rip it off and make it as cheaply as possible, which they succeeded in doing, but when you use them side by side, you know that they're not in a league of their own, and I really don't recommend the Arch Nemesis, despite being less than half of the Cadillac bar and some of the other competitors on this list. Next, we have the Kabuki Kadillac Bar, and this is kind of the gold standard for the arc pendulum bars, and it's the one that kind of popularized them in recent history. Chris Duffin claims that they engineered this bar to make it virtually impossible to put your shoulder in a bad position when using this bar because of how the angles are aligned perfectly to stack with your joints. After using all the multi-grip bars in this video, I honestly can't say that the handle angles made that much of a difference for me personally. I didn't notice them being better on one bar versus the other, specifically on the Cadillac bar. With that being said, I absolutely love this bar. I had pretty much the opposite reaction using this for the first time than I did using the Arch Nemesis for the first time. I immediately thought this bar was worth the price, worth the hype, worth the wait, and since then, it's pretty much been my go-to. This bar's built like a tank, and it's gotten even better quality-wise since Rogue started manufacturing it. The original version that I had was version 2, and that was the one that had just the powder coat on the handles, and initially that was great, but over time it kind of wore down, so I upgraded to the version that Rogue's producing with knurled handles, and I can say that that's a worthwhile upgrade. The knurling doesn't have the same bite of a normal barbell, but it provides a lot more grip than the initial powder coat that I had in my previous version. Overall, I'm a huge fan of this bar, and if you're not deterred by the price, I'd say go ahead and pick it up. You will not be disappointed. The last bar in this category is the Rogue Fitness MG4CN. I'm also going to include the MG4C spec since I did have a little bit of experience since I owned it right before the CN version. The main thing that sets the Rogue versions apart from the Kabuki and Bells of Steel versions is that you have some customizability options. Specifically, you can choose whether you want short or long sleeves, and then you also have some say in the handle angles. These bars come with one set of straight handles, but then from there you can choose whether or not you want to pick up a set of 16 degree or 20 degree handles. You can pick two 16 degrees or two 20 degrees, or 116, 120, or you can choose two more straight pairs if you want. Unfortunately, if you want 3 sets of angled handles, you're going to have to buy all 3 separately, and then you'll also still have the included straight pair, so you'll have 4 total. And it would be nice if Rogue would let you choose which one you wanted to come standard with the bar instead of just kind of giving you one at default. The original MG4C gives you the option to choose between 28.5mm handles and 32mm handles, although the straight pair that comes standard is only going to come in 28.5mm, so if you want all 3 sets to have 32mm handles, you'll have to buy those 3 separate, and then you'll have that extra one that is a little bit smaller that comes standard, so that's a little bit unfortunate. You still have to spend a little bit more there as well. Another unique feature of this bar is that the sleeves spin, and when you pair the spin of the sleeves with the camber, that allows the bar to absorb more of the instability instead of passing it down to the lifter. The biggest complaint with the original MG4C was the fact that it was massive, and then Rogue shortly afterwards came out with the MG4CN, which was the narrow version. Unlike Bells of Steel, Rogue actually took ownership and did right by the customers by allowing them to trade in the MG4C for the MG4CN if they wanted to. They only had to pay return shipping, and it was only $25 when you used Rogue's shipping account, so it wasn't really that much, so that's what I did, and that's how I ended up with the MG4CN. That being said, the original MG4C was not a bad bar. The frame was just massive compared to the MG4C, and it didn't really provide any benefits with being bigger. Overall, I'm a huge fan of the MG4C and the MG4CN. My biggest knock on the bar is that they come out to be an awkward weight at 52 pounds and 53 pounds respectively when you add 3 handles, and then on top of that, they are absurdly expensive, especially when you opt for the stainless steel options.
So the next category of bar we're going to look at are the Seesaw or teeter-totter bars. So that's going to be the EliteFTS American Cambered Grip Bar and the Titan Fitness Multi-Grip Camber Bar. So these bars, like we went over before, they have that seesaw teeter-totter effect, which means, they want to rotate one way or the other, and they never find true center the same way the arc pendulum bars do. So with that, they're going to rotate less, which I know is kind of counterintuitive, but like when you think about it, they're going to rotate less when you're pressing and you're watching other people press, because you're going to be doing all that additional stabilization with your joints downstream. So with that, you would think that the arc pendulum bars are obviously superior, right? Not necessarily. With those bars, you're eliminating limiting factors, but you're also not going to be working those areas as extensively as you would with these bars. So with these bars, even though you transfer some of that force down to your joints, you're also transferring it down to your stabilizer muscles. So you're getting stronger overall with these bars more than you would with some of those other bars. So, those arc pendulum bars would be great if you're dealing with a wrist and elbow injury, but the EliteFTS and Titan bar, these ones are going to be better if you don't have any sort of injuries and you're trying to increase, your strength overall, because you're going to be using more muscles in different ways, especially when you start switching up the handles. So that's going to be the main benefit of the teeter-totter bars or seesaw bars. But with that, let's kind of go over a little bit of the physics as well. So with that, you have your handles on the same plane as your sleeves. You can flip the bar both ways, and you are not going to be more unstable one way than the other. So what that gives you is more versatility in using these bars. So you have a deficit, and then if you were to flip it around, you have a decreased range of motion. So with this, you can simulate a board press, versus here, you have a deficit. So when you have a deficit, you are working on your bottom end strength of the press, versus doing a board press, you're working on the top end strength and a little bit more of your triceps. So with this bar, you get that same versatility that you don't get with these arc camber bars. So that's another huge benefit. Same thing goes when you move the center of mass to the side versus the other ones. So here, when you're doing a curl, so it's going to function similar to a dumbbell, which is not going to add that extra strain downstream versus the pendulum arc bars. So that's the other big benefit of the Seesaw teeter-totter bars. They have that versatility to pretty much use them in any direction, any plane, any way pretty much. So the Seesaw bars, even though they're less balanced and add a lot more strain to your joints, they're a lot more versatile, and they're probably the better pick if you just kind of want to get stronger overall, versus the arc pendulum bars, which are going to be a lot more specialized. So with that, we can move on to the third type of bar.
The first bar in the Seesaw category is the EliteFTS American Cambered Grip Bar. With the recent popularity of the arc pendulum bars, I feel like this bar was really overlooked for a long time, but recently it's been gaining a lot more popularity as, the hype wore down on the other type of bars. And this bar is always at the top of every list as among the best multi-grip cambered bars. This bar only weighs 38 pounds, and unlike the Arch Nemesis, you never really feel like the lighter weight of this bar makes it feel like awkward or, weirdly balanced. The sleeves are also smaller than normal barbell collars, so you will need to pick up some axle collars if you don't already have some. The handles of this bar are not knurled, but when you take the angles, the spacing, and then the fact that there's 4 sets of handles instead of 3, I never really had an issue gripping this bar. I still use chalk, and it would be nice if they were knurled, but it's not the end of the world with this bar. When looking at the build quality of this bar, it is not going to be the prettiest, and when compared to the Rogue MG4C and the Kabuki Cadillac, it does not feel premium whatsoever. At full price, this bar is going to run you $315, but EliteFTS usually is running promos on it, and I've seen it as low as, $200, but more frequently around $236-ish. EliteFTS does not offer free shipping on all of their products, but again, they usually run promos where you can get this bar without having to pay extra shipping. So if you're ever in a spot where you find this bar around the $236 with free shipping, it's an absolute no-brainer. I would 100% jump on it. But if you're in a spot where you're looking at it and it's full price at $315, I would still consider it. This bar is that good that I would pay $315 for it all over again, despite it not, being super fancy, having all the bells and whistles. It just works that well. Especially if you're a home gym owner, the versatility of this bar is unmatched. So, as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of this bar, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. The last bar that we're looking at in the Seesaw category is the Titan Fitness Multi-Grip Camber Bar. I have the old version of this bar, and I've been using this version since 2020. Titan has recently upgraded this version, so I will only be commenting on the original version, although the new updated version looks like it's very similar in size to the EliteFTS bar that we just looked at, so I think it's pretty safe to make some assumptions with the functionality of this bar when I compare my experience with the original Titan version and also kind of cross-reference it with my experience on the EliteFTS version. I picked up the Titan version when I was waiting for the Cadillac bar to come back in stock after I realized I hated the Bells of Steel bar. I found a great deal on the Titan one secondhand, and I figured I'd give it a try, and I was very, very impressed with it overall. This bar has 2 neutral handle sets that you'll primarily use for pressing, and then 1 angled set. I actually found that the neutral handles weren't that bad when you were pressing. Obviously, I like the angled ones a little bit better, but it really wasn't that bad. And then on top of that, I think the neutral handles are a lot more comfortable when using this bar to row. My biggest issue with this bar is that the frame was just so massive, but Titan looks to have since fixed that and made it a little bit smaller so that it fits better in narrower power racks. With the smaller frame size, it looks like the weight of the bar decreased from 47 pounds down to 39. The sleeve diameter also went from standard 55 millimeters down to axle bar diameter at 48 millimeters. These aren't too big of a deal, but the one thing that I do think is unfortunate is that they decreased the handle diameter from 31 millimeters down to 33. The handles of this bar are knurled, and on my original version, the knurling had a little bit of a bite, which was pretty good, especially on a specialty bar. I have talked to some other people who have this bar, and the knurling on theirs are super passive, so that's going to be a little inconsistent from bar to bar. I'm not sure what the new version is going to have, or if the QA is going to be a little better, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I really like the original version of this bar, especially at the price point of $199, but now that they raised the price a little bit to $230, you might want to start considering some of the other ones, but either way, if you were to pick up this bar, especially if you were to find it in the scratch and dent section of Titan's site, I'd say it's a pretty good buy.
The last type of bar we're going to look at is the Seesaw Pendulum Bar. So as the name suggests, the Seesaw Pendulum Bar is going to be a hybrid of the Seesaw bars and the Arc Pendulum. So you have your handles all straight across in the frame, which is pretty much straight like you would have on the Seesaw bars for the most part. And then you also have the weight below the handles, including this handle here. It's still above the weight, so you still get that pendulum effect like you would with the arc bars. So what that does is that still gives you a little bit of that balance that you would get with the pendulum, but it also, still teeters a little bit one way or the other, just like the Seesaw bars. So you still have that added stabilization that you need to recruit when you're pressing that you wouldn't necessarily get with this with the arc pendulum bars. So you get kind of the best of both worlds here, but with that you also get some of the shortcomings. So because you have the pendulum effect going on here, it's not the best to use in both directions. So if you were to flip it around and try to do board presses, you're still going to be fighting gravity the way you would, like when I had the kettlebell inverted. Same thing when you're doing curls, although these ones are a little bit better to do curls or extensions with, because they are a little bit closer to the center of mass. But if you're going to do curls with any of the other handles, you're still going to be fighting gravity more than you would with a seesaw bar, where you have your center of mass at the same spot as your center of rotation. So with this one, you get all the good parts of both, or not all the good parts. You get most of the good parts of both bars, but you also get most of the bad parts, or I guess pros and cons for both. I don't want to say good or bad, because it really depends on what you're looking for. So yeah, that's the Seesaw Pendulum Bar in a nutshell.
I really like what Rep did here. What they did is kind of what they've been doing with their specialty bars of late. They kind of sit back, they look at what's good about the existing bars, what the common complaints are, and what people want to improve on them, and they take that and implement all of that into their version of the bar. And that's exactly what they did with their Swiss bar. So with this, they, like I mentioned before, they incorporated portions of the Seesaw and Pendulum bars, but at the same time, they did not rip off the Cadillac bar or the EliteFTS bar like Bells of Steel and Titan did. The build of this bar is pretty good as well. It's 45 pounds, so it's not an awkward weight. It's not super long. The frame is a pretty good size that'll fit into pretty much any rack. The sleeves use a standard barbell sleeve diameter, so you don't need any specialty collars. And then while we're on the topic of the sleeves, they are also hard chrome, so that's a good aesthetic finish that's going to be corrosion resistant as well, and it's not going to scratch up like some of the other ones that you've seen on this list so far. The handles here are also on the bigger end, which is awesome, and they are also knurled, although the knurling is super passive that I wouldn't really consider that a pro here. But I mean, at least there's something. I guess it could have been worse. Pricing isn't too bad either when you consider the build quality and the polish of this bar when compared to like the Bells of Steel, Titan, or even EliteFTS. Although I think this bar would be in a perfect spot if it was priced at $250, but I mean, it's been selling out, so I guess other people aren't really too concerned with that. All things considered, I think this bar is a solid choice for anyone in the market for one of these bars.
At the end of the day, there's not going to be one bar here that's vastly superior to all of the other ones, especially when you look at the 3 different categories that these bars fall into. Each bar is going to be very specific in what it does, and it could fit one person better as opposed to another one, depending on what your goals and intended stimulus are. But with that being said, if I had to pick one bar and had to get rid of all the rest, which I will be getting rid of a bunch of them, the one I would keep would be the EliteFTS bar. And the reason I would keep that is because of its unmatched versatility, the fact that it has 4 handles. It can be used on both sides. It can be used in any plane of motion. And overall, the EliteFTS is a great company. They really knocked it out of the park. I think this may have been the first one to come out of all of them. And even with that, it's still always among the top of the list as the best, multi-grip cambered bars out there. So that would be my pick if I had to pick just one. Luckily, I don't only have to keep one of these bars, so if I were to rank these from my most favorite to use to my least favorite, the order of that would be number 1 is the Rogue MG4CN. I primarily use my multi-grip cambered bars, as a way to switch up my regular bench pressing with a straight bar. And with that, I usually like, having that break on my joints, and the Rogue bar does the best job at doing that. My next favorite bar to use is probably going to be the Cadillac bar for the same reason, especially the upgraded version that has the knurled handles, and it has the X that's lowered a little bit down in line with the frame, so it's a lot more comfortable when you have it up against your chest. So with that's why this is my number 1 favorite to use, my number 2 favorite to use, and then after that, the EliteFTS is my next favorite. Then following that up is the Rep Fitness version. Then we have Titan Fitness, and then lastly we have Bells of Steel. And my last ranking of these bars is going to be how I would recommend them to other people. So this is not knowing their intended, training goals, and then not really having budget in mind or anything. If I were to just, take all of the information that I have on these bars and all the experience I have with them and kind of, throw that out there with a very blind recommendation for the masses, I would rank those as follows. So number 1, it would be a tie between the EliteFTS and the Rep Fitness. So this would be 1A, 1B, depending on what you're looking for. So if you don't know what you're looking for whatsoever, I would say Rep is probably the number 1 choice there, just because it's a Swiss Army knife, master of none, but jack of all trades. Number 2, and then the second best choice would be the EliteFTS for all the reasons I stated when I said it would be the one bar I would keep if I had to get rid of all except for one. After these 2, then it's going to be another tie. I would say it's going to be Kabuki and Rogue. So again, without knowing the details, I would say that the Rogue is that it can get the edge because of the customizability of having the shorter sleeves and customizing the handles to fit your build specifically. But at the same time, the Kabuki bar, it's tried and true. It's kind of the gold standard for the most part. Like this is the one that I feel like kind of popularized the multi-grip cambered bars and kind of made them to the forefront of the home gym world. After that, my next choice would be Titan. I mean, it pretty much takes a lot of the components, especially the updated version from EliteFTS. It obviously just doesn't have the angled handles, and doesn't have that extra set of handles as well. But otherwise, it's gonna have most of the same benefits as the EliteFTS version. So that would be my number 5 choice, I guess. After you take into account all the tie for first and second, it'd be Titan, and that would be my budget pick as well. And then my last choice would be the Bells of Steel. I wouldn't really recommend that to pretty much anyone unless you were very, very specifically, dealing with, wrist and elbow pain. You're probably going to be a very tall, like long person, but then also at the same time very new to strength training. So the lighter bar won't really be an issue. And then lastly, like if you are very tight on space and budget and you really, really need that cable attachment because you are literally in such a packed space that you can't fit, like another single other cable attachment. And then also, not being able to spend more than that $199 price point and even $30 more to jump into some of these other options. That would be about the only time I would recommend the Bells of Steel. But even then, that's a very select niche group that could benefit from that bar as well. So hopefully the wait for this video was worth it and you found some sort of benefit from it. If you did find any of this helpful and you decide to pick one of these up, please consider using some of the affiliate links in my description. Feel free to support my channel if you're so inclined. If not, no big deal. But otherwise, thanks for watching. Please like, upvote, or whatever it is on YouTube now, subscribe, and check out my other social media channels as well for more regular home gym content. Thanks again.